Some terrifying but true horror stories that will keep you up at night. Story 1. In 1973, several Enfield, Illinois residents claimed to have seen an unidentified creature scurrying about. Sociologists were quick to dispute the claims, concluding it was little more than a social contagion, or kind of group hysteria, that is. Once one person claimed to see the monster, everyone else was susceptible to seeing it, too. The MT Vernon Register News even has a contemporaneous quote from one of the first people to see it. They said it had 3 legs on it, a short body, 2 little short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stood 4.5 feet tall and was grayish colored. Excuse me while I gather myself, because that's terrifying. Some locals claimed it to be nothing more than an ape or kangaroo that escaped, with residents from the surrounding area calling in to confirm as much. One Ohio man contacted authorities, believing what people had been seeing was his lost kangaroo, Macy. Those damn kangaroos are hard to keep track of, huh? Still, like the best scripted lore. Several residents to this day still believe something unknown is stalking the woods in and around Enfield. Whether it's just an ape, which had been documented as being in the area, or some kind of monstrous aberration remains to be seen. It ultimately amounts to what you're willing to believe, and how far you're willing to stretch your credulity. It makes for a sensational campfire story. However, if you're ever in Enfield, just be certain to keep your eyes peeled. You never know what you might see. Story 2. Hotep del Salto, which translates literally to Hotep of the Leap, has allegedly been haunted since it was first constructed as a mansion in 1923. It was designed by architect Carlos Arturo Tapias, who was inspired by the French architectural aesthetic that was popular during the time. Its location overlooking the famous Tequendama Falls gave the mansion breathtaking views. But, according to some creepy stories, the falls may also be the source of its alleged hauntings. The mansion was the scene of many lavish parties and, by 1928, was turned into a popular hotel. But then, the horrific tragedies began. Hotel patrons inexplicably leaped to their deaths out of their windows. At least one homicide took place there, when a guest brutally murdered a young socialite in one of the rooms, splattering the walls with her blood. Meanwhile, guests of the notorious Hotel del Salto claimed to witness spooky apparitions that appeared around the hotel at night, including the ghost of the murdered socialite. In local legends, Tequendama Falls is said to have been where many people of the indigenous Muisca tribe escaped from Spanish colonizers by leaping off the nearby cliff centuries before, though the native legend says the Muisca were incarnated into flying eagles as they jumped off the cliff, thus surviving the brutal plunge. Locals believe the land has since been cursed by the Muisca, some of whom may have not survived their attempts to escape the Spanish invaders. Even after it was shuttered in the 1990s, scary stories about the hotel continued to emerge. Some claim that loud screams can still be heard coming from the abandoned hotel. Additionally, they say that the constant mudslides on the road to reach the property and the stench from the heavily polluted river water further prove paranormal activity on the grounds. Story 3. The brutal story of how the Villisca axe murders unfolded. On June 10, 1912, the Moore family was sleeping peacefully in their beds. Joe and Sarah Moore were asleep upstairs, while their 4 children were resting in a room down the hall. In a guest room on the first floor were 2 girls, the Stillinger sisters, who had come for a sleepover. Shortly after midnight, a stranger entered through the unlocked door. Not an uncommon sight in what was considered a small, safe, friendly town, and plucked an oil lamp from a nearby table, rigging it to burn so low it supplied light for barely one person. On one hand, the stranger held the lamp, lighting the way through the house. In his other, he held an axe. Ignoring the sleeping girls downstairs, the stranger made his way up the stairs, guided by the lamp, and a seemingly unerring knowledge of the home's layout. He crept past the room with the children and into Mr. and Mrs. Moore's bedroom. Then he made his way to the children's room and finally back down to the bedroom downstairs. In each room, he committed some of the grisliest murders in American history. Then, as quickly and silently as he had arrived, the stranger left, taking keys from the home and locking the door behind him. The Villisca axe murders may have been quick, but as the world was about to discover, they were unimaginably horrifying. The next morning, the neighbors became suspicious, noticing that the usually rambunctious home was dead quiet. They alerted Joe's brother, who arrived to take a look. What he saw after letting himself in with his own key was enough to make him sick. Everyone in the house was dead, all 8 of them bludgeoned beyond recognition. The police determined that the Moore parents had been murdered first, and with obvious force. The axe that had been used to kill them had been swung so high above the murderer's head that it gouged the ceiling above the bed. Joe alone had been hit with the axe at least 30 times. The faces of both parents, as well as the children, had been reduced to nothing but a bloody pulp. The state of the bodies wasn't the most concerning part, however. Once the police had searched the home, after murdering the Moores, the killer had apparently set up some kind of ritual. He had covered the Moore parents' heads with sheets, and the Moore children's faces with clothing. He then went through each room in the house, covering all of the mirrors and windows with cloths and towels. At some point, he took a 2-pound piece of uncooked bacon from the fridge and placed it in the living room, along with a keychain. A bowl of water was found in the home, spirals of blood swirling through it. Police believe that the murderer had washed his hands in it before leaving. By the time the police, the coroner, a minister, and several doctors had thoroughly perused the crime scene, word of the vicious crime had spread, and the crowd outside the home had grown. Officials cautioned the townspeople against going inside, but as soon as the premises was clear, at least 100 townspeople gave in to their gross fascinations and traipsed through the blood-spattered home. One of the townspeople even took a fragment of Joe's skull as a keepsake. Story 4. The Haunted Doll. When you think of haunted dolls, it's likely the creepy, old Victorian-looking porcelain kind that springs to mind, none of which you probably have laying around. Still, don't get too comfortable around any kids' toys too soon, though. A Disney's Frozen Elsa doll that was gifted for Christmas 2013 in the Houston area made headlines earlier this year when it seemingly became haunted. Per KPRC to Houston News, the doll recited phrases from the movie Frozen and sang "Let It Go" when a button on its necklace was pressed. For 2 years it did that in English, Mother Emily Madonia said. In 2015, it started doing it alternating between Spanish and English. There wasn't a button that changed these, it was just random. The family has owned the doll for more than 6 years and never changed its batteries. The mother says the doll would randomly begin to speak and sing, even with its switch turned off. The family decided to throw the creepy doll out in December of 2019. Weeks later, they found it inside a bench in their living room. The kids insisted they didn't put it there, and I believed them because they wouldn't have dug through the garbage outside, Madonia told KPRC to Houston News. At that point, Elsa ceased to sing the English rendition of Let It Go altogether, speaking only Spanish when pressed. The family then double-bagged the bizarre doll and placed it at the bottom of their garbage, which was taken out on garbage day. They went on a trip shortly after, but when they returned, Elsa too had come back and was waiting in the backyard of their home. This time, the family mailed Elsa to a family friend in Minnesota, who taped the haunted doll to the front bumper of his truck. It doesn't seem to have made its way back to Houston yet, as per Madonia's latest February Facebook update on the creepy doll. Story 5. A deadly exorcism. In August 2016, in North London, 26-year-old Kennedy Ife began acting strange and aggressive following a pain in his throat. He reportedly bit his father, threatened to cut off his own penis, and complained of a python or snake inside of him before his family restrained him to a bed with cable ties and excessive force. As the BBC reported, the family then set about attempting to cure Kennedy through restraint and prayer over the next 3 days, the court was told. His brother, Colin Ife, told police, "It's clear that thing was in him. What we believed was a demon because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him," he said. "We had to restrain him for himself. It was clear if we didn't restrain him, he could have tried to harm people in our family." Kennedy Ife had been bound to his bed for 3 days without medical attention when his brother called emergency services. Explaining that Kennedy Ife was complaining of dehydration, he appeared to have developed breathing issues and was pronounced dead at 10:17 a.m. As The Independent reported, while police were at the house, Colin Ife allegedly carried out an attempted resurrection by chanting and praying for Mr. Ife. All 7 of Kennedy Ife's family members were accused of manslaughter, false imprisonment, and causing or allowing the death of a vulnerable adult. A post-mortem examination revealed over 60 wounds, including a possible bite on Kennedy Ife's body. And his father, Kenneth Ife, along with 4 of his brothers, sustained injuries as well, the BBC reported. Kenneth Ife told jurors he ordered his sons to take shifts and use overwhelming force, but denied that an association with cults, occults and secret societies played any part in the death. After a 4-day jury deliberation, all 7 family members were cleared of charges on March 14, 2019. Story 6. A Pennsylvania family's dream home became a nightmare when they discovered the horrifying remains of a Dutch magic ritual inside the walls. The Bretzius family had no idea what horrors lurked behind the walls of their Auburn, Pennsylvania dream home when they moved in. It wasn't until 2012, when they began pulling down some of the walls to add insulation, that they discovered something completely bizarre and unexpected. The walls, they found, were packed full of dead animal carcasses wrapped in newspapers dating to the 1930s and 40s, along with spices and other random objects. An expert told the family the objects were mostly likely used for POWing, ritual folk magic once practiced by the Pennsylvania Dutch, POWing, and the York County hex murder. The practice of POWing has its origins in a German book called The Long Lost Friend by John George Homan, published in 1820. Later editions renamed it POWOs, after the Algonquian word for a gathering of medicine men. It is a collection of folk remedies, recipes, spells and talismans to cure domestic ailments and rural troubles. The book gained notoriety in 1928 when it was found in the possession of murderer John Blimier. Thanks to a local witch named Nellie Knoll, Blimier became convinced that he had been cursed by his neighbor Nelson Riemeyer. He and some accomplices broke into Riemier's home to find his spell book, but found Riemier instead. The group killed and mutilated the man in hopes of lifting the curse. Though they do not know who filled the walls of the house with animal carcasses or why it was done, the Bretzius family is still struggling with their own curse. They have run out of finances to remove all of the carcasses from the walls. Also, the mold made them sick, and the smell won't go away. Story 7. I've lived in the same house for over 12 years before I moved out. It was an innocent vintage house that laid atop a hill. We had a maid that usually cleaned our house once a month. She was nice, and we were close with her. We were quite surprised when she said she was quitting. We kept asking her why, but she wouldn't tell us, saying that she wasn't comfortable with telling us. We were beyond confused. After lots of begging, she finally told us what made her want to quit. She said that while she was cleaning the house, she saw a girl in a white dress with long black hair that covered her face. We all had dirty blonde hair, and we weren't home at the time she was cleaning the house. We were super freaked. That night, when I was in bed, it suddenly got really cold. I hugged the nearest pillow next to me and prayed that it would keep me warm. That morning, I woke up and found a long black lock of hair in my bed. The pillow I was hugging was on the opposite side of the room. My siblings pranked me a lot, so I automatically assumed they were messing with me. So I ran downstairs into their rooms and told them that it wasn't funny. They denied it, but I didn't believe them. That was until they told me they weren't home last night and just got back this morning. They were both at a sleepover with their friends. I knew my parents wouldn't do this, so I immediately was freaked out. Since that moment, everyone refused to sleep over, claiming that they would see a girl of the exact description of our maid staring at them. I would keep waking up with strands of hair in my bed. It got so bad, to the point where I started sleeping in my parents' room. We moved out now, but I soon found out that way back a serial killer lived in our house, that buried his victims under his house, and that he preferred little girls. This still freaks me out to this day. Story 8. Growing up, I saw things. My mum pushed it off, as it was just imaginary friends, like all parents do. But after a while she started realizing it wasn't that. I had turned 9 and I had an agonizing fear of things following me and seeing things everywhere. My mother started taking me to church, but sadly that didn't help. After a while I stopped talking to her about it. I just didn't want to bother her about it. I grew in agony as these things kept bugging me. Fast forward 4 years later, when one day a new one appeared. A lady with long black hair, dressed in white, skinny as all get out. I never saw her real face since it was always covered by her hair, but she seemed like one of the nicer hallucinations I had. The lady just sort of followed me in the waking and dream worlds. In my dreams I'd forget what we'd do, but I knew she was there. After a while I started calling her Amnesia. That's just how I referred to her. I never really thought anything about it until one day in May in 2016. I was 15 then. I had come back home from a band concert, and everyone in my family was outside, along with the other people who were staying with us. Smoke was coming out of the house, and all the lights were off. I ran out of the car and asked what was happening. They explained that our 2 dogs were barking at something in the hallway. Heaven, a girl staying with us at the time, had went to go see what was happening. In our hallway stood an 8-foot-tall, shadowy male figure. She had screamed and got everyone. Her stepdad started smudging and blessing the house. While I was outside, I stared, talking to one of Heaven's sisters about the figure. I explained that I had a hallucination that fit the description. I called him Dream Taker. After I had said that Heaven's sister had me tell my mom everything. About my dreams, my hallucinations, everything. When I told her about amnesia, all the color in her face went cold. She told me that, after I was born, she had taken me home to our apartment at the time. One day she had put me in my crib, and then went to go lay down for a bit. Just to be clear, my mother's bedroom was just across the way from mine, and she could see my crib from her bed. She had fallen asleep for a while when she was suddenly awoken to what sounded like someone walking in the hallway towards her room. Her blood ran cold. All she could do was look in horror. There in the hallway was a pale, skinny lady. She had charcoal black hair that was a tangled drape over her face. She slumped over while walking as her white tattered dress dragged behind her. She started walking into my room, and my mother immediately started to get up, but she couldn't. She felt as if an invisible force was binding her to the bed. The lady stopped and turned to look at my mother. Her hair swept from her face to reveal a face my mother could only describe as terrifying. She had no eyes. There were black voids that seemed to pierce through my mother's eyes. Her jaw seemed broken and hung open, and a reddish-black ooze dripped from it. The lady let out a high-pitched screech, and I started to cry in my crib. The lady turned back around to my crib. She struggled as she listened to my screaming. Then I stopped. Everything was silent. Her thoughts ran through her mind. She couldn't think right. After a while, she could finally get up. She ran into my room to check on me. I was sound asleep like nothing had happened. She grabbed a bat and searched the apartment to find nothing. Everything was the same as it was. She grabbed our phone and called our neighbor. "Hey, did you hear my baby cry? She was just crying a little bit ago." "What are you talking about? Your baby wasn't crying. Is everything okay?" I didn't know what to think. Was this lady a blessing or a curse? My mother also told me my grandma dwelt in black magic, and it could be a byproduct of something gone wrong. But who knows, honestly? I don't know how I feel about it, honestly. Story 9. Years ago, maybe 2006, 2007-ish, I took my girlfriend, now wife, to the movies. We were just out of high school. We decided to see The Exorcism of Emily Rose, against her mother's advice. We made it through half of the movie. She wasn't enjoying it at all, and neither was I. We head out early, and since we have some time left, we decided to head to a park next to her house and just hang for a bit before I had to drop her off. We park my truck. I take the keys out of the ignition and sit them on my lap. A few seconds after this, the radio comes on, and the LCD display is just showing weird symbols, and there is a very deep voice coming from the speakers. It was really loud and clear, but the words it was saying weren't English, and neither of us understood what it was saying. We proceed to jump out of the truck, kind of freaking out. After the scary movie, we were uneasy, and this was just over the top. When we hopped out, the radio shut off and the voice stopped. After a few minutes, we decide we should head to her house now. She lived less than a block, so we speed over there. Once there, I had the strangest feeling like someone was right behind me and all watching me. I was real scared at this point. It was just so odd. I called my mum, told her that I couldn't explain now, but I wouldn't be home tonight, and I would tell her more in the morning. No way I was driving that truck home alone in the dark. We sat for a while with her family, and I asked her mom if I could stay the night there, and her dad said I could share a room with her brother. Fast forward to when we were going to sleep. Her brother gave me the bed and slept on the floor, facing away from me and towards the door. After a bit, sitting there propped on my elbow facing the door, all of a sudden it got very cold, and I couldn't move or talk. Into the doorway walks a silhouetted figure that was black like smoke, with solid white eyes, and appeared to have dreadlocks and a high ponytail. It stood in the doorway for what seemed like forever, staring straight in my eyes, and then turned and walked into the bathroom. As soon as it leaves the door, I can move again, so I have to know if it's in the bathroom at this point. I nervously get up and get out of the bed. Her brother startles me by asking, "What are you doing?" And I say, "I have to go to the bathroom." Nothing was there. Since in that movie, the weird stuff always happened at 3:30 a.m. For the next 4 years or so, almost every night, I woke up at 3:30 with the same someone watching me, feeling. I chalked it up to sleep paralysis and a weird tech glitch, and the rest on me being paranoid and anxious about it. I've told all my friends over the years, and about 2 years ago decided to tell my brother-in-law. He was dumbfounded when I told him, and said he remembers that night very clearly, because he was frozen and saw the same thing. Story 10. So, this story takes place in late 2016, the year Pokemon Go came out, and the time the game had huge hype around it. So me being a teenager who wanted to play what everyone else was playing, I got the game myself and I enjoyed it. One of my friends also played the game, and we had the idea of having a sleepover at my house and have our own Pokemon adventure together. We both thought it was going to be a lot of fun. So we got it organized. and my friend, who I will call Dan, stayed over at my house. For the day we messed around, ate snacks, played video games on my PS4 and etc. It was at 10 p.m. when Dan suggested we go out and play Pokemon Go. I brought up that it was too late, but he persisted. So I asked my mum if it was fine, and she said it was. Sure, I had my concerns and all, but I honestly thought nothing bad would happen. This was due to the fact I live in a small and quiet town. No one would be out this late, so it wasn't like we were going to get mugged in an alley. So we grabbed our phones and headed off down the main street of my town. We walked past the cemetery, then past the football oval. But as we passed the football oval, we saw a black Ford Territory parked by it. No lights were on, so we didn't think anyone was inside of it, so we walked past it. We got onto the footpath, past the oval, when we noticed the Ford pull up next to us on the footpath. We found it strange, but kept walking anyway. We were passing the post office when we saw the same Ford pull into the car park in front of the post office. This gave us the suspicion this random car was following us. So we kept walking, but at a faster pace. We walked past the post office, and we're now walking past our town park. As we were walking by the park, Don told me to hide behind the bush which surrounded the park entrance. As we crouched down behind the bushes, we saw the Ford pull on at the park entrance, confirming 100% that this Ford was following us. After what felt like an eternity for me, the Ford drove off, and we got out of the park and started running back to my house. As we started running back to my house, I looked behind me to make sure the Ford was gone, and what I saw horrified me. The car turned left at the end of the street. I originally thought that maybe he was just leaving the town, but then I realized this park has two main entrances. The way he turned, he was driving to the second entrance, meaning he believed we ran to the other side of the park and was trying to cut us off that way. There was no argument left. This guy wasn't following us for safety purposes or etc. He was chasing us. I am not an athletic person, unlike my friend Dan. But in this instant, I was keeping up with him from the sheer fear of what will happen if this driver caught us, or what his intentions were with us. We ran past the post office, past the football oval, and we were halfway past the cemetery when we saw the headlights of the Ford behind us, and I was terrified. There was nowhere to hide. It was a footpath with a giant fence separating the footpath and the cemetery. There was nothing to hide behind. Luckily enough, Dan came up with an idea. He pointed out we were both wearing dark hoodies. He said to put the hood over our heads, crouch down and pretend to be rocks. At the time, I thought it was an absolute stupid idea, but that was all we had. So we did just that, pretended to be rocks, and the Ford drove past us. No slowing down at all, which meant this stupid plan actually worked. After he drove past, we continued booking it. We were at the end of the cemetery when we saw him driving our way again. This time there was a bin to hide behind, which we did. We drove past us again and we continued booking it. We got to my house and locked the door behind us to show some kind of safety. We explained to my mum what happened, and after that day she made some new rules. No more playing Pokemon Go at night, and my little sister was not allowed to go out by herself to play it. She wasn't happy about that, but at the least we are still here to tell this story. That is all for today. If you have enjoyed this video, do you like and subscribe? I post once a week or more. You can also subscribe to my Patreon below to support me. Hope you have an absolutely amazing day, and hope you'll check my other videos on screen.